Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, a place where we demystify complex technologies every day and provide real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping entire industries. But we do all this in a language that everyone can understand. And today I want to talk about the growth of renewable energy, which is incredibly important if we're going to achieve these net zero targets around the globe. But I do also keep reading that centralized systems in place for energy actually inhibit the growth and distribution of green energy, but this is not my area of expertise. I don't want to oversimplify anything here. So when I learned about a company called Powerledger and how they've developed a tech solution that matches time and place of energy generation to the time and place that is required with a blockchain-enabled software that also allows people to track generation of renewable energy, track its use, track the source of that generation to ensure that it's green, while also making sure that any excess renewable energy is able to be traded peer-to-peer within a local energy community. I felt compelled to find out more, and I don't want to reveal any spoilers too early on here. A quick few questions for you all. Does online privacy or lack of it concern you? And do you ever feel like your online privacy has been invaded? Well, after 2,300 podcast interviews on here, there are so many areas that I'm now aware of, such as the fact that my internet service provider literally knows everything that I do online. And incognito mode in a web browser doesn't offer as much protection as many think. But think about this. Would you find the prospect of handing over your laptop or phone to a complete stranger, or even a friend for that matter, to look at your browsing history to be the stuff of nightmares? And yet, someone out there knows absolutely everything you do online, every click, whether you like it or not. So if you want to stop internet service providers from always looking over your shoulder and profiting from your data, you need something like Private Internet Access, which is the world's most transparent VPN provider. They have over 30 million downloads. PIA has servers in 84 countries and in all 50 states. And it's the perfect software for staying private online because it hides your IP address and encrypts your internet connection. And Private Internet Access is really easy to use. There are apps available for all operating systems, and one subscription can protect up to 10 devices at once. And I'll be honest, as a daily tech podcaster, keeping my life private is very important to me. And after thousands of interviews talking about security issues on here, I'm more determined than ever to keep snoopers out of my digital life. So if you want to enjoy all the benefits of Private Internet Access, now's a great time to subscribe. Simply head to piavpn.com/techtalksdaily and get an 83% discount. Seriously, 83%, which works out at just $2.03 a month. And you also get 4 months completely free. But to activate this offer, you must go to piavpn.com/techtalksdaily for a truly private digital life. One last time, piavpn.com/techtalksdaily. I'm going to ask you to buckle up and hold on tight, because today, no matter where you're listening in the world, I'm going to beam your ears all the way to Australia, where Dr. Jemma Green is going to tell me about the scale of the problems that we're experiencing in the planet right now, and also the role of technology, what Powerledger is and how that's leveraging technology to make a real difference to the world. But enough from me. Let's get Jemma onto the podcast now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Certainly. My name's Jemma Green. I'm a co-founder and the chairman of Powerledger. We're a software company. We make software for utilities and for large companies that help them innovate on different products that they want to develop for their customers, and also big companies to track their ESG performance around electricity to be able to validate their sustainability claims. So we have clients in 12 countries. I'll give you a couple of examples. We're working with the fourth largest electricity retailer in France. We've developed a product with them called Choose Your Mix. And we're also working in India with a large utility on what's called a local energy market. So this is where we facilitate a peer-to-peer trading to relieve grid congestion so that the grid doesn't have to make upgrades to physical infrastructure. Another example, we're working in a university campus in Thailand, tracking and facilitating trading of 12 megawatts of solar between about 120 buildings on campus. That also involves some EVs and on-site batteries. So that's, a little bit about Powerledger and what we're doing.
Fantastic. And as I said before we started recording, I've been following you since 2017. So I'm really excited to be learning more about what you're up to at the moment and the story behind the company. But before we do, I've got to ask, can you share your origin story, where your passion for tech came from, or just a moment that would put you on this path you're on today?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is that I did a bachelor degree in commerce in Australia, and my father is Irish. So it gave me an EU passport. After I finished my degree, I moved to London and lived and worked there for 11 years. Worked in investment banking. First half of my career was in sort of mainstream finance, and then I voluntarily got involved in creating a recycling project at JP Morgan's London offices, and the project was pretty exciting to roll out until I saw people throwing their recycling into their small rubbish bin at their desk rather than at the recycling bin at the end of the aisle of desks. And I went back and pitched to the chief operating officer that this project needed a part 2 called Bin the Bin, and that we would get rid of all the small bins at everyone's desk and put a recycling bin and a rubbish bin at the end of the aisle to increase the rate of recycling. And he bought into this idea, and we rolled it out 3 months later, and I became the most hated person in the office. And there was a Facebook page created called Bring the Bins Back, and I was blamed for rats. And fortunately, the chief operating officer at the time said, well, they wouldn't get to behave like this at home. The system stays. Yeah. But I thought, wow, this is a really interesting field, like getting people to do things that we know are good for us all but requires some kind of behaviour change. And I thought, I want to work in like sustainability. This is really fascinating to me. And I went on and did some studies in sustainability. And at the time, the bank was actually setting up like its own environmental and social risk management office to look at its financing, lending and underwriting activities. I was chosen to help set up that team and worked looking at the bank's different financing activities focused in developing countries in like higher risk sectors like mining, oil and gas, heavy manufacturing and electricity. And I did that for about 6 years, and I just thought, it's time to move back to Perth, to Australia, in fact, where I'm from. And originally I was going to go to Sydney or Melbourne, where all the banks are, but I just felt really like a pull to come home, which as a result of there not being any investment banks here in Perth meant sort of coming up with some other like idea for career. And I did have some sense of trepidation as well, because I thought my job was pretty exciting in London and I was moving home to what would be the sleepy backwaters. And in between leaving London and moving back to Perth, I did a bit of a sabbatical for 9 months, hiked the Camino de Santiago and hiked in Nepal, Middle East and South America. And I got this idea that I wanted to build an eco-village, which is a bit of a radical thought. I shared it with a few people, and a friend of mine said, you should do that as a PhD and you should talk to this professor at Curtin University in Perth. So I reached out to him via email and said, look, I'm a returning Western Australian. I was formerly a banker and worked in sustainability, and I've got this idea to build an eco-village. What do you think? And he wrote back almost immediately and said, that's a great idea. You should do that in Fremantle and I can get you a PhD scholarship. And shortly this was all happening. So I was halfway through when I returned to Perth, the professor had introduced me to the mayor of Fremantle at the time, and that's what sparked us like finding a project together. And there's like a national cooperative research centre that was focused on low carbon living. So I did my doctoral research through the university and this research centre, but I was stuck basically designing a solar and battery system for an apartment building within the eco-village. And I couldn't find any software that would create what I had wanted, which was like a marketplace within the eco-village where each home or was allocated a portion of the output of the solar and the battery system. And if they weren't home to consume that, they could trade it with their neighbours. And that was where I got to, and I couldn't find anything that would do that. And then I had just had my first child, Emily, in December of 2015. And like 7 weeks after that, I was introduced to by a former banking colleague of mine to my now business partner. And he had developed applications in blockchain for different sectors. And he developed some solutions for some things not related to electricity and was seeking like some introductions to some people in my network. And I called up my mum and said, "Mum, could you come over and hold Emily, my baby, while I talk to him?" So she came over and sat on the couch holding Emily and started talking to John, and he's telling me about blockchain this, blockchain that. And this was like February 2017. Not many people really had heard about blockchain, and I'd only really heard about it in terms of Bitcoin. And he was explaining all sorts of things that it could do. And I said, "Oh, well, could it do anything in my PhD research project?" And we started to look together and saw that it could do what I'd hoped for in my doctoral research, but also had broader applications in terms of digitalizing assets like carbon credits and renewable energy certificates and trading electricity across the grid financially and for settling using digital currency and things like that. We got really excited. And like 3 months later, we'd set up the company. So we're now 7 years old. And as I said, we've got clients in more than 12 countries. So yeah, it was a bit of an accident, I would say, not intentional that I was going to set up a company weeks after having a baby. But yeah, it's what happened.
Wow, what an amazing story. And there's a big reason I asked that question. I think we all often judge people by their current success, and some people point and say, "Hey, look how lucky they are." But or maybe I want to do something similar, but I don't belong in the tech industry and all those kind of things. But of course, hearing your story there, going from finance, investment banking in London to a recycling project that would lead to an eco-village or the urge to create an eco-village and ending up in the world of blockchain. It's a fantastic story. And that path led you to Powerledger. But for anybody listening, just hearing about you for the first time, can you tell me more about your mission to create markets that remove obstacles 24/7 renewable energy? Because that is your aim here, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's lots of countries and companies that are making pledges around net zero, 100% renewable energy. And I think deciding what you're going to remove from your electricity system is all well and good, but you've got to have something to replace it. Otherwise, you're going to have power shortages. And if you observe the current energy crisis or talk to any energy expert, the sense of market failure becomes really apparent. And if you dive in a little further, it becomes clear that we're going to need energy markets that take account of time and place to get there. So by matching energy consumption and energy generation by time and place, we can address issues such as like excess rooftop solar in the noontime, which is called the duck curve, or curtailment energy, which is effectively where there's too much energy and you have to prevent like a solar farm or a wind farm from generating electricity at all, and things like fuel poverty. And if you look at the countries around the world that have progressed renewables significantly, like Germany or Denmark, they have the highest electricity costs in the world. And it's not coincidence. What we've got is a paradigm which has pretty much been unchanged for a century, with large power stations bringing electricity in one direction to people's homes, a centralized energy system. In the past sort of 20 years, a lot of generation of electricity by virtue of rooftop solar happening in the distribution part of the grid. So electricity is going in two directions. And that was really facilitated by feed-in tariff subsidies that just had electricity generation pretty indiscriminately in our system. And in Germany, you've got a situation where feed-in tariffs and subsidies have driven like a lot of generation in the north of the country, whereas the people are in the south. So then they've had to build very expensive transmission lines, and you spend a lot on grid stabilization services to bring what is cheap electricity at the levelized cost at the unit end. But when you add up the total cost, it becomes very expensive. And the price signals didn't really encourage smaller generation to be installed nearer to consumption, perhaps not where the most perfect wind is, but where wind or solar is pretty good, but nearer to where the consumers are. And so you don't have that other sort of secondary and tertiary spend that's going on. And so Germany also had the kind of perfect storm where, as a result of the nuclear challenges in Japan, they decided to turn off their nukes and retire them. And then there's been the situation with the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And so their gas supplies are constrained. And so you've got this kind of perfect storm that's going on, like in Europe, coupled with places like France, which exports a lot of electricity from nuclear, where its nuclear generators are producing like significantly below what their kind of rated capacity is. So all the countries that would be buying from them normally are short. So you've got this kind of ideological things that happen around energy where politically people want to kind of decarbonize. And then you've got these things that just happen that all add up to not enough dispatchable electricity and a lot of variable electricity, which becomes really expensive. And then the polarization of this conversation where renewables is sometimes blamed for this, but it's really the centralized planning of renewables. Anyway, long and short, we saw all this happening and went, well, what about if you actually created local energy markets and had local price signals that encourage the growth of renewables where and when it's needed? And so you could use the renewable energy to actually solve the problems that they're causing from centralized planning. Yeah, and so that was basically the idea behind Powerledger, really digitization of power for a sustainable future, and to create markets that remove the obstacles to 24/7 renewable energy. And we basically see a future where ordinary citizens and corporations alike can harness their rooftops and storage and buying power in an optimal way. And to do this, that we have to bring continuity in transmission and distribution that's less liable to traditional and conventional grid failures, which we're seeing with increasing frequency. So we think that rather than subsidies, genuine markets will find the best way forward, and the converse to that is also true. Centralised energy markets will fail in the long term.
And it feels like you've always been ahead of your time. If you look back to removing the bins and encouraging everyone to recycle, that led to that Facebook page. But now, of course, everybody's doing that. There's a real change in attitude, and you were there right from the beginning. And as I said, I've been following you since 2017 when attitudes were nowhere near what they are now. And here we are now, fast forward to 2023. The growth of renewable energy is crucial to the future, and especially if we're going to achieve those net zero targets that have been set around the globe. So, however, though, can you expand on how the centralized systems in place for energy are actually inhibiting the growth and distribution of green energy?
Well, there's different ways that this is kind of happening. Not all networks, but some networks would rather it's quite a big ask for electrical engineers to become marketeers. Yeah. And if you're saying, well, instead of upgrading a substation, you run a market and that will deliver the same supply and demand balance. Well, you've got to suspend disbelief a little bit around that to give that a go and understand what market dynamics are going to achieve that. And that's a big ask. So it's a paradigm shift, I would say, that we're asking of electricity markets and electricity grids. And so it's not that easy. And you've got companies that want to become like 100% renewable, and you've got big companies that say, well, we are already. The way they go about doing that varies quite a lot. Like you can legally and validly make those claims. I wouldn't say with doing funny business, but doing things that are not that good for the grid, I would say. So let me give you an example. You could have a company that operates in New York and they could buy renewable energy certificates, which is like a kind of carbon credit for renewables from, say, Texas. And you could be consuming energy all throughout the year in New York, but you could buy credits from Texas that were all generated from electricity in, say, March of that year. And you could retire them against your load in New York throughout the year. And then you can say, I'm 100% renewable. And if a few companies do this, it's not that big a deal. But if a lot of companies do this, it's essentially causing the overbuild of renewable energy, not in the markets in which they operate, and not encouraging the growth of renewables where they are operating. And some of the larger corporates have begun to realise this, that they're actually causing these perverse outcomes on grids. So kind of new gold standard has just emerged, I'd say, in the past 2 years, which is called hourly matching of energy. So 24/7 energy. So they're matching each kilowatt hour they consume against a kilowatt hour that was generated in the place in which they operate. And they've made commitments. Some companies like Google and Microsoft and Iron Mountain have made commitments to do this by 2030. It could well take them longer, is my view on the matter, but they're on the journey. And they're saying we really want to encourage this hourly matching to change the energy system, not just get cheap credits that allow us to make these public claims legally and validly. So I think that you've got that system which really allows that to happen right now. And then you've got grids which, are being asked to put more renewables into the system and know how to do it in a very traditional way, which was just upgrade substations, transformers and capacity banks. And so there's a lot of tension there just around retooling the system and shifting the thinking, I would say. And there's a kind of what I would call like an oversimplification of things that are very complicated. And I think there's an ideological push towards renewable energy, but I think that can be an oversimplification of something that's actually very complicated. So slogans, just stop oil, they don't solve the problem just because you don't have a like-for-like replacement. And even tomatoes, they sound like they're better than meat, but they use 2 tablespoons of oil in their production and transportation. So there's complexity at every level. And, because you can't swap a gas-fired power station for solar farms, for example. And lots of people say, solar's now cheaper than gas, but it's just not, they're just not comparing apples and apples. So you can't solve one problem by causing chaos somewhere else. It has to be sustainable in the bigger sense. So I think, Powerledger is a software platform that facilitates this trading of electricity, where we need to find new ways to incorporate renewables into a system without ever increasing spend on the network, or companies that are actually changing the energy system for the better in meeting their sustainability goals.
So many important points there. It might take longer than 2030 to reach a lot of those goals, but they're on that journey, and that is the most important thing, like you said. And as this is a daily tech podcast, I want to learn more about the tech solution to all of this, a solution that reduces the cost of energy while encouraging the growth of renewable energy without compromising the grid. So can you expand a little on how you're tackling some of these problems with Powerledger?
Yeah, so basically, our clients can white label our product, or their customers can connect to our system. So we can do it both ways. We have like off-the-shelf solutions that we've developed, and we do add features based on like clients' needs and demands as well. So, for example, in Europe, there was a directive from 2018 called the Clean Energy Package, which has seen the emergence of energy communities in Europe. So this is where schools or farmers could become energy suppliers to each other. So we're starting to see regulation which is really signalling for this more direct trading of electricity. And our solutions can facilitate these kinds of new markets, new commercial models and new business models. And then we also have a marketplace for trading renewable energy certificates, and one certificate is representative of 1 megawatt hour of renewable power. And our system is like built within Java. It's a microservices system, like enterprise system. We use APIs to connect to our clients to get data back and send data back and forth. And we also write data to our blockchain, which is a private consortium chain based on Solana. We were previously using an Ethereum-based blockchain to record electricity transactions and to tokenize certificates, but we moved to Solana because it can process far more transactions per second, up to 65,000 Solana is capable of, whereas with Ethereum, it can do about 10 to 12 transactions per second. And even with the upgrades of like layer 2 and sharding, it might get to larger amounts, but Solana could equally like add extra blockchains, which is like sharding and layer 2 as well. So we saw it as really night and day and a clear signal that the Solana blockchain is far more fit for purpose for the electricity use case. And in 2017, we created an ERC20 Ethereum token, which is called Power, POWR, which our clients can pay for their software license to use our platform in cash, or they can pay in Power. And this is a way of incentivizing them to use Power as payment for their access to the system as an access token, because if they pay in cash, we keep the proceeds, but if they pay in Power, we can contract to return the power at the end of the contract. So they're relatively incentivized to do that. And we issued about 1 billion units of the token to the market, and we retain about half in our treasury, and there's about half in circulating supply, and they're traded on various cryptocurrency exchanges around the world. So that's another like interesting aspect of our kind of tech stack or product offering, if you like.
And you made some great points about Solana and Ethereum there. And for people listening outside of the crypto and blockchain space, maybe a business leader listening, can you just help them understand why we need blockchain and the need of a token to solve problems that we're talking about today, and what it enables you to do differently?
You can do everything without a blockchain. So then the question is, well, why would you use a blockchain? And it's a little bit similar to, you can have a supermarket without barcodes. Yeah. And it's not like you go to any particular supermarket because it's got barcodes, but the fact it's got barcodes means that the stock control is better. It's faster when you go through the till, there's less mistakes. Whereas if you go to your corner store or milk bar, it doesn't have barcodes and it functions just fine. So with blockchain sitting in the back, it's not like necessarily even that you go, well, I must blockchain. It's more sitting in the background. It counts things and records what's occurred in a way that builds trust. And in a world where claims are being made around, is it solar or is it solar from this farm or wind from this farm, knowing that you've got a rock solid audit trail builds trust. Because if people are going to pay a premium for something, which is often the case, then they want to know that they're not being duped. And so I think that is one of the value propositions of blockchain. Another is that you can tokenize things like carbon credits and renewable energy certificates. And in doing that, what that provides is with normal certificates, you could technically sell a certificate twice. You could sell a certificate that's actually been retired. It may just be an accident or it could be by fraudulent means. Whereas if you tokenize something, no two people can hold that digital asset. It can only be held in one wallet at a time. And if it's retired, it can't be sold. So you remove the incidence of fraud and duplication or, selling something that's been retired out, doesn't exist anymore in actual fact. So that's why you would want to consider using blockchain. You can do it without, but it just makes the system work more efficiently, I would say, in the background, and builds trust in the same way barcodes do in supermarkets.
And just to bring to life some of the stuff that we're talking about here, could you possibly walk me through a use case that would just help listeners understand maybe a before and after picture of where we're heading or that mission to where you're heading to?
Certainly. Yeah, just going back to the French example I mentioned before about choose your mix. So customers can choose up to 70% of the energy that they're getting from renewable sources. So they can choose like 10% solar from a particular solar farm or 15% wind from a particular wind farm. And what we do is we measure the output of those generation assets, the solar farm or the wind farm, within like a time period, which is called an interval, like 30-minute time period. And we measure the load profile of the customer within that same interval. And we match those two things together. So, and we create that record on the blockchain. So a customer can say, I'm getting 10% of my electricity from this solar farm and 15% from this wind farm. And that can be done up to 70% of the total electricity that they're consuming.
Wow, that's fantastic. And I also read that Powerledger has won numerous awards, such as, I think it was crowned Global Champion in World Summit Awards. But can you expand on some of these achievements and success stories and what they mean to you and how they're going to motivate you to keep moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to get recognition. And I think probably earlier on, those things were more significant when our brand wasn't as well known, and third-party validation is great for a startup and a scale-up to, build awareness around the brand and endorsement of the brand. So I think those things are helpful. Earlier on, I mean, they're always important, but I would say now, when we first started the company, a lot of the projects that we were doing were to prove that the tech worked. That I don't think that really is in the concern right now. We have a track record. It's more about, can we deal with the amount of scale that clients want? So there's a lot more validation now on our abilities to be able to deal with the volume that customers are wanting to put through the platform, and things like how do we comply with different privacy regulations in different jurisdictions, and these kind of rules are changing quite a lot. But I think also projects like in India or in France, if companies in those places are considering a project, they want to know that others in the region have done something. Then it's not that important to a French company that we've done a project in Thailand. Whereas it is quite important to an Indian company that they can call up some of their counterparts in another country and find out how that all went. So we've got those lighthouse projects in those different countries, which I think has helped to build awareness and recognition for what we're doing, and also help people to see what they might want to do in their own market.
Well, my plan today was to help demystify some of the complex technologies out there and help people understand how you're making a real difference in the world, solving real world problems by giving an overview of what you're doing at Powerledger. But for members of your community who have patiently listened to your overview of Powerledger today and hoping to find out a few teasers of what they can expect this year, what they can expect in the future, what your focus is there anything you can leave those people? Because I'm sure they're hungry for a teaser or two.
Well, I decided not to do a New Year's resolution this year. I went for a word for 2023, which was, basically, like a theme for the year. And the word, well, it's kind of two words, was take off. So launching, leaping into the unknown, setting sail into the world, these kinds of ideas sort of sitting behind the word.
Awesome. And is there anything on Powerledger you can reveal? Anything in the horizon you can hint or?
Well, we're just setting up an office in Tokyo.
Awesome.
And we're setting up an office in India right now. And we're also going to set up another office in Europe as well. So, it's very exciting, creating more in-market presence.
And as we come full circle, we began talking about your origin story, but obviously if you reflect on your career, none of us are able to achieve any success without a little help along the way. So I'm curious, is there a particular person that you're grateful towards who helped get you where you are that we can give a little shout out to today?
Yeah, there's like probably three people I would say. I know that you only asked me for one, but I'm just going to be slightly belligerent.
Go for it.
So I mentioned that I did my PhD at Curtin University, and Professor Peter Newman from Curtin, he was my doctoral supervisor, and he really, helped me a lot in coming back to Australia and settling in, and my PhD research and networking me into what was happening in Australia, and a lot of the things that have happened to me as a result of the support that he gave. And just tracking back in time to the bin project, Jacob Stott, who was the Chief Operating Officer for JP Morgan at the time, he sponsored me to do that recycling project and the binless project. So he was very courageous to give me the latitude to do that, and also supported me to do my studies at Cambridge University as well. Really backed me a lot. So I'm enormously grateful to him. And then the third person is my business partner, John Bullich, who I've been working with now for nearly 7 years. And he's very experienced and encouraging and optimistic, and very talented person developing technology product for his entire life. And I feel really lucky to have a co-founder that shares the vision and the passion for what we're working on. So those three people I think are very, very important and have helped me a lot.
Fantastic. And for anyone listening that just wants to find out more information about Powerledger, maybe get involved, maybe contact your team or just join your community, what's the best starting point for everything?
Well, we have a website, powerledger.io. We have Twitter a page. I have a Twitter account of my own. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Facebook. We're on Telegram. So you can find us, from all those different social media platforms.
Awesome. Well, I'll have links to all those on the show notes so people can find you nice and easily. I love chatting with you today about why technology is important if we're to consider a better way of growing renewables, and also how you've created a blockchain that is super energy efficient. I mean, if we put that bad publicity about blockchain and what it's received over the years about its energy intensity, I love how you've created your own proprietary blockchain solution specifically for the trading of renewable energy that is actually much, much less energy intensive than other blockchains out there. But more than anything, just thank you for sharing that and your origin story and giving a shout out to a few people that made that possible.
Thanks so much for having me.
Everything we talked about today was an incredibly complex problem, and it's much more complex than many of the news stories that we see on our feeds. And I hope that we was able to demystify it in some way today and make it more accessible to you. And not only the scale of the problem that they're tackling with Powerledger, but also how Powerledger works, the role of blockchain and crypto, and how it all fits together. But if you've got any questions or you'd like to come on the podcast, all I ask is email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, @NeilCHughes. We can keep this conversation going and also expand it into different areas. But for that, I need you to get in touch. So keep those messages coming in. But it's time for me to go now. So a big thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.